My name is Eleanor Margaret Collins. I'm 82 years old, and this is not the story I ever thought I'd tell. I've always been a quiet woman, not shy, just steady. I raised 3 children in the same 2-bedroom house where I still live. Today, I was married to a good man, Henry, for 41 years before he passed in his sleep one cold October morning. I've buried my parents, my husband, and far too many friends. But through it all, I've never been afraid of life. Until recently, I wasn't afraid of death either. I lived each day simply. A cup of tea in the morning, a little garden out back, church on Sundays, card games with the ladies on Tuesdays. If you'd asked anyone in town about me, they'd say, "Oh, that's Miss Eleanor, sweet lady, keeps to herself, but always sends a thank you card." That was enough for me. It was a good life, but none of that prepared me for what happened in the hospital. I didn't go there expecting anything more than a diagnosis. I had been coughing for weeks, and my chest felt like someone was sitting on it. My daughter, Lily, had begged me to get checked out. So, one chilly afternoon, she drove me to the emergency room. That was the beginning of everything at first. It was just tests, blood work, monitors, IVs, oxygen. The staff was kind, but their faces grew serious. With every update, they used words like pneumonia, fluid retention, and oxygen saturation. I understood enough to know it wasn't just a cough anymore. By the time they admitted me overnight, I felt the shift, the way the nurses moved with urgency, the way Lily gripped my hand a little tighter, the way the room seemed colder than it should have been. I remember thinking, this could be it. Not in a panicked way, just aware. When you've lived as long as I have, you don't fear the idea of dying. You've already said so many goodbyes. It starts to feel like just another step in a long walk. But I wasn't ready, and I didn't know why. That night, as the machines beeped and the fluorescent lights buzzed above my head, I began to pray. Not with words, really, just with thoughts. With breath. God, I don't know if you're still listening, but if you are, I need you. I didn't ask for a miracle. I didn't ask to live. I just asked not to be alone. That was all I wanted, and that's when everything began to change. It didn't happen all at once, not with thunder or flashes of light. It began with stillness, thought with a calm that settled over me, not from the sedatives, but from somewhere else. A presence, not visible, not touchable, but unmistakable. I had felt grief before, loneliness, joy, anger, but this was something entirely different. It was peace. It was the kind of peace that doesn't make sense in a hospital room at 2 a.m., the kind that wraps around your fear like a blanket dot. And for the first time that day, I let myself rest. I had no idea what the coming days would bring. I didn't know that I would see things no one would believe, that I would feel the hand of an angel, that I would be given a choice, to stay or to go, that I would see my life, all of it through the eyes of something greater than myself. I didn't know any of that. All I knew in that moment was that someone, something, had heard me, and that I wasn't alone anymore. It didn't happen all at once. You don't just wake up one morning and realize you're ill enough to die. It's slower than that, quieter. It started with a cough, soft, at first, the kind you ignore. Then came the tiredness. I chalked it up to age. I'm 82, after all. You expect your joints to ache, your breath to shorten, your pace to slow. But something felt different. There was a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't quite explain. Not pain, exactly, more like a weight. I'd walk from the kitchen to the living room and feel winded. I couldn't finish a phone call without needing to sit down. Even tea didn't taste right. I should have told someone sooner. But women like me, women who raised children during hard years, who washed their own clothes by hand, who buried their husbands and kept going, we don't complain. We push through. It wasn't until my daughter, Lily, came over one Thursday afternoon that she really looked at me. Looked. "Mom, are you okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing. I nodded, as I always do. "Just tired, sweetheart. Nothing serious." But she wasn't convinced. She touched my forehead, then listened to my breathing. "You sound awful," she whispered. That night, she called a family friend, a nurse who sometimes checked on me, and after one listen over the phone, she said, "Take her in. Don't wait." I didn't fight them. I don't know why. Maybe somewhere deep inside, I already knew. The ride to the hospital was quiet. Lily drove slowly, her eyes glancing over at me more than the road. I stared out the window. The streets were the same ones I'd traveled for decades, past the bakery, the school, the corner where Henry used to wait for the bus, but everything looked different that night, like I was seeing it for the last time. At the ER, they moved, fast, chest x-rays, blood tests, oxygen mask. I didn't feel scared, just separate, like I was watching it all happen from a few feet away. My body in one place, my mind somewhere else. The doctor came in, a young man, too young, I thought. He was kind but serious. Pneumonia, he said, and low oxygen levels. We're going to admit you, Ms. Collins. We need to monitor you closely. Lily's hand gripped mine so tightly, but I didn't feel fear, just a strange kind of quiet. I remember lying on the hospital bed as they wheeled me down the corridor. The lights above flashed past, one by one, like stars going out. The walls felt cold, the floor too smooth. I tried to stay awake, to keep my mind focused on the little things. The squeak of the gurney wheels, the smell of bleach, but I kept thinking, is this it? Is this how it ends? In the room they gave me, the nurse hooked me up to machines. She smiled gently, tucked my blanket in, and asked if I needed anything. Yes, I said, voice dry and hoarse. Just stay a moment. She did that. She stood there quietly, adjusting the monitor, pretending to fiddle with her chart. But I knew she was just giving me what I asked for, not medicine, not water, company. Eventually, she left, and I was alone. The room was dark, humming with low mechanical sounds. I could hear the patient in the next room coughing. Someone down the hall was crying. The beep of a machine echoed like a heartbeat. I stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in a long, long while, I prayed. Not with fancy words, not the way they taught us in Sunday school, just a whisper. If you're real, I need you now. That's all I said. And I didn't expect anything to happen, but something did. Not immediately, but enough that by morning, something inside me had begun to shift. Not my body, my spirit. And that's where my real story begins. I had been admitted once before, many years ago, when my appendix nearly burst. But this was different. This time, they called the ambulance. It wasn't anyone's fault. Lily had done her best. But in the middle of the night, my breathing grew shallow. My chest felt tight again, tighter than ever. It scared her. I could see it in her eyes. I tried to wave her off. It'll pass, I rasped. She didn't listen. And thank God for that. The EMTs arrived quickly. 2 young men, one tall and calm, the other short with nervous hands. They asked me questions. I could barely answer. Do you know where you are? What's your name? Can you describe your pain? I nodded, shook my head, said nothing. Not because I couldn't speak, but because something inside me had gone very, very still. They lifted me carefully onto the stretcher. I remember the cold of the night air hitting my skin as they wheeled me down the front walk. The porch light flickered above us. It always did that. I remember thinking, I should have fixed that. Funny what you notice when you're being carried away from the home you might never return to. Lily followed behind, her arms crossed over her chest like she was holding herself together. I wanted to say something to comfort her, to thank her, but the words never came. They loaded me into the back of the ambulance and shut the doors. That's when the silence began. Not the absence of sound. There was plenty of that. The engine, the beeping monitors, the rustling of papers, the medic's soft voice muttering codes into a radio. No, it was the other kind of silence, the sacred kind, the kind that fills your chest with weight, the kind that makes you feel like the world is pulled away, just slightly, and left you suspended in the middle of something bigger than you can name. I stared at the ceiling. The lights passed overhead like before, those same sterile, flickering fluorescents. The medic took my vitals, checked the monitors, adjusted the oxygen. I could feel him watching me, but he didn't speak much, and I didn't either, because I was remembering, not in words, not even in pictures, just feelings. Henry's hand in mine during our wedding, the sound of my son's first cry, the way my daughter once looked at me when she skinned her knee and I kissed it better. It all came back at once, like wind across tall grass. I wondered if this was what people felt just before they crossed over. I wasn't scared, but I wasn't peaceful either. I was waiting. That's the only word that fits. Waiting to see where the road would take me. Waiting to know if I'd wake up again. Waiting to find out if this moment, this simple, silent ride, would be the last stretch of my earthly story. Then, for just a second, I thought I heard something, not a voice, Not out loud but inside. Something like, "You are not alone." It wasn't grand or dramatic, just a quiet knowing, a nudge in the part of my heart that no doctor could ever find. I looked at the medic. "Do you believe in God?" I asked, blinked, surprised. "Sometimes," he said. I nodded. "Me too," I whispered. We didn't speak again for the rest of the ride. When we arrived at the hospital, the doors opened to fluorescent lights, rushed nurses, cold air, and the smell of rubbing alcohol. The world pulled me back into its busy, clinical grasp, but something inside me had stayed behind. In that quiet space between my breath and the sky, the ride was over, but the silence remained. And I think now, looking back, that's where the angel first found me. Not in the hospital room, not in my sleep, but in that ambulance, in the stillness, in the space where I said nothing, and still, somehow, was heard. Hospitals are strange places. They are full of people, full of machines, full of motion. But when you're the one lying in the bed, hooked up to wires, beneath the buzzing fluorescent lights, it feels like the loneliest place in the world. I was taken to a small, windowless room in the older wing of the hospital, room 112. I remember the number clearly, not because it meant anything, but because I stared at the little white plastic plaque for what felt like hours. The walls were pale, not white exactly, but that sterile off-white that tries to look calm and ends up looking cold. There were machines on one side, beeping softly, a tray with gauze and gloves, a TV bolted high up in the corner, off. No flowers, no cards, no soft things. It felt like waiting in a blank envelope. The nurse Clara was kind, older than the others, gentle. She tucked me in and told me her daughter had the same name as mine. "Eleanor," she said. "It's not common anymore." "I like it." I tried to smile. I was too tired. They ran more tests, more blood draws, more poking and prodding. I let them do it without protest. Not because I was brave, but because I was too weak to resist. My body felt like it had separated from my spirit, like I was watching it all from just outside myself. Lily stayed for a while. She sat in the chair beside me, reading quietly, checking her phone, adjusting my blanket every 10 minutes. I could see the worry etched into her face. She looked too young to be caring for her mother like this, but she did it anyway without complaint. "I'll be back in the morning, Mom," she whispered when the nurse finally made her leave. "Call if you need anything. I love you." I nodded, and then I was alone. The beeping of the monitor became my lullaby. The hum of the vent above my head, the whoosh of the oxygen, they were the only companions I had. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I started thinking about my life, about Henry, about the choices I made, about the things I regretted, about the people I hurt, the apologies I never got to make, the ones I never received. And then I thought about death, not in fear, but in curiosity. Was this what the end felt like? A cold white room with no windows, a quiet night where you waited for the machines to go still. I wasn't afraid, exactly, but I did feel unfinished. I hadn't said goodbye to everyone. I hadn't hugged Elsie one more time. I hadn't seen the daffodils bloom this spring. I hadn't tasted another bite of lemon pound cake, or heard the choir sing it as well with my soul in person. And yet, part of me felt ready, or close to it, because there's something that happens when you stop fighting, when you let go of the panic and just exist. You start listening, not with your ears, with your spirit. I remember lying there, breathing slowly through the oxygen tubes, feeling like time had stopped. And in that pause, in that cold white stillness, I felt something new, something warm, not heat, exactly, but comfort, like someone had laid a quilt over my heart. No sound, no light, no voice, just presence, and, for the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone was with me, truly with me, not the nurses, not my family, but something else. I didn't know what it was, not yet, but I knew, in that moment, that the cold white room was no longer just a room, it was holy. Lying there in that hospital bed, with the machines murmuring beside me, I expected nothing, not visions, not dreams, just maybe a bit of rest. But then, it began, not suddenly, not like a flash, more like a tide, slow and certain. Memories, didn't knock, they didn't ask permission, they just came. The first one was simple, a kitchen. I saw my old linoleum floor, the chipped kettle Henry refused to throw away, sunlight coming in through lace curtains. I was young again, not 82, but maybe 30. The radio played softly in the background. My hands were in dough, flour on my nose. I was singing, and just like that, I remembered who I used to be. Before the wrinkles, before the grief, before the weight of years bent my back, the memories didn't stop. They came in waves. My daughter's first birthday, Lily, with cake all over her cheeks, clapping her hands, laughing. Henry standing in the doorway the night we lost power, holding a lantern, smiling like a boy. My father dancing with me in our tiny living room while the war raged on the radio. A phone call I never made. A goodbye I didn't say. Each memory was full, not just sights and sounds, but feeling. I didn't relive them. I inhabited them. I could smell the sugar cookies. I could hear the creak of my old porch swing. I could feel my heart breaking again when we lost our first baby, a sorrow I had buried for decades. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and I didn't stop them. I didn't try to make sense of it because I knew someone, something was showing me my life, not like a punishment, not like a review, but like a gift. A reminder that even in all the ordinary days, there had been glory, hidden in the smallest things, in a handshake, in a hymn, in the way my daughter once reached for my hand without thinking. I realized then how much I had forgotten, not because of age, but because we don't carry every moment forward. We only carry what hurts, what echoes, what burns. But in that hospital bed, I saw it all, not just the pain but the beauty. And I think I was being reminded of something important, that my life was not wasted, that even in its quietness it mattered. I whispered, "Thank you," not to anyone in the room, but to whoever was listening. And in that moment, for the first time in days, I felt whole, like my memories weren't just mine to mourn, they were mine to cherish. Asterisk. Hospitals don't sleep. Not really. Even in the dead of night, there's always movement. Monitors beeping, carts rolling, quiet footsteps down sterile halls. But somehow, it's lonelier at 3 a.m. than at any other hour. That was when the nightmares started. Not the kind with monsters or ghosts. These were worse because they were real. They began with confusion. In my dreams, I was home, making tea. I could hear the kettle whistle. But when I reached for the handle, my fingers touched cold metal, not ceramic, and suddenly, I was back in the hospital bed, tubes in my arms. Then I'd wake up, sweating, disoriented, unsure of what time it was, or if time was still happening at all. I started to fear sleep, because every time I closed my eyes, I slipped into some half-world, too vivid to be dreams, too distorted to be real. I saw people I hadn't spoken to in years. My mother, my baby brother, who died when I was just 6. I heard music that didn't come from anywhere. I smelled smoke when there was none. Was I hallucinating? Maybe. The doctor said it was normal, that oxygen deprivation and medications could create confusion in the elderly. But deep down, I knew these weren't random fragments of a tired brain. These were visitations, always from angels, sometimes from my own regrets. There were dreams where I was arguing with Henry again, over something petty, and I woke up in tears, remembering I never apologized. Other times, I saw myself standing in a mirror at 20, unsure of who I'd become. One night, I heard someone whisper my name right beside my ear. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. And yet, I didn't feel afraid because through all of it, the jumbled memories, the half-real voices, the cold sweat, there was one constant: the nurses, especially Clara. She came on the night shift, just after midnight, always quiet, always gentle. She'd check my vitals, change my fluff my pillow. But what I'll never forget is how she stayed. When I told her I was afraid to sleep, she pulled up a chair. When I cried in my sleep, she put her hand on my shoulder. When I muttered things I couldn't remember, she'd say, "It's okay, Miss Eleanor, you're safe." No one tells you how important that word becomes when you're dying safe. I wasn't sure if I believed her at first, but over time, her presence became a kind of tether, a human anchor in the storm of my mind. I told her once, in a moment of rare clarity, "You remind me of my daughter." She smiled. Then I'm honored. Some nights, she would sing softly, under her breath, old hymns. On one of my worst nights, after a particularly cruel dream, she said, "Do you want me to read to you?" I nodded. She opened a small, battered Bible from her pocket and read Psalm 23. Yea, though I walked through the valley of the shadow of death, and I cried, because I knew I was walking that valley, and Clara, kind Clara, was holding my hand, in the hospital. Time moves differently. Hours pass slowly, yet entire days vanish. You start to lose track of when someone last visited, or, even if they did, it becomes hard to remember what's real and what you only dreamed. That's how it felt with my family. At first. They were around often, Lily especially. She brought me toiletries, fresh socks, photos of Elsie. My son James called from Chicago every evening. Sarah came when she could, bringing little updates from the neighborhood and news from church, but slowly, they stopped coming as much. No one said anything, no dramatic goodbyes, just gaps. One day between visits, then 2, then 4. I didn't blame them. Not really. Hospitals are hard places. They smell like fear. They remind people of endings. People have jobs, kids, responsibilities, and I've always been the strong one. Maybe they thought I didn't need them as much anymore, but I did. I missed them terribly. Every time the door opened, I hoped it would be one of their faces. Most times, it was just another nurse or technician with a clipboard and a neutral smile. I wanted to call. I really did, but it felt strange, like I was asking for too much. I kept thinking, if they wanted to come, they would. So I stayed quiet, and the silence settled around me like a second blanket, heavy, inescapable. One afternoon, Clara noticed. She was adjusting my oxygen when she said, gently, "You haven't had visitors lately?" I nodded. "They're busy." She paused, then said something I'll never forget. "People stay away not always because they don't care. Sometimes they stay away because they do, and it hurts too much." I blinked, and I realized, maybe, they were scared, not just of losing me, but of seeing me so close to the edge. I remembered when Henry was in the hospital right before he passed. How I had sat in my car for a full hour, frozen, because I couldn't bear to walk into that room and face what was coming. Maybe my children were feeling the same. Still, it hurt. I missed James's terrible jokes. I missed Sarah's gentle hands. I missed Lily's tired but determined voice saying, "Hi, Mom." And more than anything, I missed Elsie. Her picture sat on my tray table, smiling, big-eyed, completely unaware of how close her Nana had come to saying goodbye. One morning, I finally asked Clara for my phone. With trembling fingers, I sent a message to Lily. "If you can, bring Elsie. I'd like to see her." No reply came right away. I stared at the screen, heart pounding harder than any test the doctors had run. 2 hours later, Lily walked through the door, holding Elsie in her arms, and just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. Elsie squealed, "Nana," and reached for me. Tears filled my eyes before I could even speak. Lily sat beside the bed, held my hand, and said, "I'm sorry, I should have come sooner." I squeezed her fingers. "No," I whispered. "You came when I needed you most." In that moment, everything changed. Not the diagnosis, not the machines, but me. Because my family hadn't forgotten me. They had just needed reminding that I was still here. They say 3 a.m. is the loneliest hour. The hospital is hushed by then. Visitors are gone. Even the night staff moves more slowly, whispering down darkened halls. The world feels paused. That night, I woke suddenly, not from pain or noise, just woke. I lay there still, breathing through the oxygen tubes, staring at the ceiling. There was nothing particularly different about the room. The machines blinked the way they always did. My phone beeped gently. The hallway light cast a faint glow under the door. But something was different inside me. I felt calm. Strangely so. It wasn't the drugged calm that sometimes followed medication. This was quieter, sharper, like the air had stilled in reverence for something just out of sight. I wasn't afraid, even though I should have been. My condition hadn't changed. I was still weak. Still uncertain if I'd live to see another week, but for the first time in days, I felt at peace. Complete peace. As if something had entered the room, though I couldn't see or hear it. I remember whispering to myself, "You're not alone." And somehow, I believed it. I tried to find a logical reason. Maybe my heart had given up worrying. Maybe I was just too tired to be afraid. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like, comfy, like someone was sitting in the chair near my bed, watching, waiting, not threatening, not even speaking, just being. I turned my head to look, just in case. Of course, the chair was empty, but the feeling remained. Warmth in the chest, softness in the air, a sense that everything, all of it, was unfolding exactly as it should. I lay there for nearly an hour, listening not to the hospital, to the quiet inside me, and in that stillness, memories rose again, but not chaotic ones this time, gentle ones. My mother's laugh in the kitchen, the first snowfall of the year when I was a child, the moment I first held each of my children. Each one brought with it a sense of rightness, and I realized something I hadn't dared to admit until then. I wasn't afraid of dying anymore, because if this strange calm, this invisible presence, this peace was any hint of what awaited me beyond this life, then maybe death wasn't an ending at all. Maybe it was a return to wholeness, to love, to God. I didn't tell the nurses about that moment. It felt too sacred, like a secret between my soul and something greater. But when Clara came in to check on me, around 4 a.m., she paused at the door. "You look different," she said. I smiled. "I feel different." She came closer. "Did you sleep?" "No," I said, "but I rested." She didn't press. She just nodded, and for a long moment, she didn't move. She just stood there beside the bed like she felt it too. Whatever it was, maybe calm, maybe grace, maybe the first breath of a miracle beginning to unfold. I didn't expect it. Not then, not in that room, not in this lifetime, but it happened quietly, like most sacred things do. It was the next night after that strange calm settled over me. I had dozed off sometime after midnight. When I opened my eyes, the room was dark again, except for the usual hallway light under the door and the faint green blinks from my heart monitor. But then I noticed something. A light, faint at first, coming from the corner of the room. It wasn't the sterile blue-white of hospital equipment. It wasn't flickering like a TV or blinking like machinery. It was warm, like candlelight, or sunrise through frosted glass. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. Still there. At first I thought I was dreaming, or hallucinating. Maybe one of the nurses had left a light on. Maybe I was seeing the reflection of something outside the window. But the light wasn't coming from a lamp or a screen. It had no clear source. It just was. It hovered in the upper corner of the room, soft, golden, still. It didn't move. It didn't grow, but it pulsed gently, like it was breathing. I stared at it, not moving, barely even blinking, and I felt something shift in the air, not colder, not warmer, just deeper, heavier, but not in a burdensome way, more real. I can't explain it fully. But the presence of that light made everything else feel less important. The tubes in my arms, the soreness in my chest, even the fear I had felt just days before, all of it seemed far away in its place. A single thought surfaced in my mind: you are not alone. The light didn't speak. It didn't change shape. It didn't fill the room. But it filled me. With a peace I hadn't known since childhood, with the sense of being seen entirely and still loved. With the certainty that this light was not of this world. And yet, it wasn't foreign either. It felt familiar, as if some part of me had known it long ago. Before all the years, before the grief, before the doubts and the prayers and the silence, I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. There was no fear, no need to ask questions, no urge to explain. Just awe. It stayed there, that glow, for what felt like hours, though I know it was probably only minutes. Eventually, my eyelids grew heavy again, but this time, sleep didn't come with confusion, or pain, or frightening dreams. That came like a blanket, soft and warm. And before I drifted off, I whispered aloud, almost without thinking, "I see you." I don't know if anyone heard me, but I know something did. After that night, everything felt different. The light in the corner, that soft, pulsing glow, never fully left me. Even when it wasn't visible, the feeling it brought stayed, like a presence had settled into the room and made itself part of the air. I breathed. I wasn't alone anymore. That was the first truth I could fully accept. Not alone, not abandoned, not waiting to die in a cold hospital bed. Something, or someone, was with me. I didn't know who. Not yet. I had no name for it, no face. But I felt it, deeply, like how you sense someone standing behind you even before they speak. The nurses noticed something in me had changed. "You seemed calmer," Clara said one morning, as she checked my I replied. She didn't ask why, but I think she knew. There's something that happens when peace enters a place where fear once lived. It's not loud, it doesn't shout, it simply is. And the people around you feel it, even if they can't name it. That day, I found myself whispering things I hadn't said in years, small prayers, simple ones. Thank you for this breath. Help me see clearly. Stay with me. Not because I was trying to bargain for life, but because I finally believed someone was listening. That night, the glow returned, stronger than before. This time, it didn't stay in the corner. I woke to see the entire room filled with a low golden light, not bright enough to hurt, but enough to chase every shadow from the walls. And I felt it again, the presence. It wasn't just watching now, it was near. I could feel it beside the bed, not touching me, not speaking, just being. A wave of emotion swept over me, not fear, not even joy, just recognition. I knew, without a doubt, that I had known this presence before. Not in this life, maybe, but somewhere. It felt older than time, but more personal than anything I'd ever known. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I whispered, "You've been here all along, haven't you?" No voice replied, but I felt the answer deep in my bones. Yes, this presence had been there when I buried my husband, when I held my first child, when I doubted, when I prayed in silence and thought no one heard. Even in the moments I thought I was completely forgotten, I had never been alone. That realization undid me. For so long, I'd carried the quiet ache of being unseen, of living a simple life that no one would remember. But now I knew I had always been seen. Not by crowds, not by fame, but by God. Or an angel, or something I still didn't fully understand. All I knew was this: I wasn't just a patient. I wasn't just an old woman nearing the end. I was a soul being watched over, and from that moment on, even the hardest nights felt different, because I knew I'd never face them alone again. The presence stood near my bed. I couldn't see a face, no robes, no wings, just light, soft, golden, still, and I knew it was someone, not just warmth, not just peace, someone, an angel. He didn't speak, but somehow, I heard him, not with my ears, with my spirit. His message came like a breeze through the trees, gentle, but undeniable. You are loved, you are seen, you are not forgotten. The words weren't in English. They weren't even in language, but I understood them fully, like they had always lived inside me. I didn't move, I didn't blink, because I was afraid that even a breath might scare it away. But the angel didn't leave. He stood there, silent, steady, and absolutely full of something I can only call truth. I felt stripped bare in his presence, like every part of my life, good and bad, was laid out in the open, and yet there was no shame, just compassion. He wasn't there to judge, he was there to remind me of who I really was, beyond my body, beyond my regrets, beyond my age, a soul, still radiant, still precious. I wanted to ask him so much, why now, why me? But I didn't have to, because I already knew. It wasn't about being worthy, it wasn't about being perfect, it was about being known. And even though he said nothing out loud, it was the clearest message I'd ever received. I don't know how long the angel stood there. Time didn't feel real anymore. The seconds didn't tick the same. It was like I had stepped out of the hospital and into something eternal. Then I felt it. A hand. It rested gently on my shoulder. Not cold, not heavy, just present. I didn't flinch. Because the moment his hand touched me, something inside me let go of fear, of pain, of everything that had weighed me down for decades. The pressure in my chest eased. My breath deepened, but more than that, my heart felt seen. This touch wasn't like any I'd ever known. It didn't press, it didn't demand, it simply said, "I'm here." And in that simple, silent message, there was healing. Not the kind that cured disease, but the kind that mends what grief leaves behind. I thought of my children, my late husband, my childhood, all the things I had carried, guilt, worry, what-ifs, and somehow, this one touch told me it was okay to lay them down, that I didn't have to fix everything before I left, that it was enough to have loved. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I wasn't crying from sadness. I was crying from relief, the kind you feel when you realize you're no longer alone in the dark. Didn't ask questions. I didn't need to, because in that single, silent moment, I knew everything I needed to know. After the touch on my shoulder, something shifted. The room didn't change, but I did. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back inside me. I started to see things. Not hallucinations, no flickers or shadows. These were visions, clear, full, alive. One moment, I was in the hospital bed. The next I was back in my childhood home. I could smell Mama's apple pie. I could hear the old floor creak under Daddy's boots. I saw my baby brother running down the hallway with wild curls bouncing. And I was there, not remembering, but reliving. Scene after scene unfolded. Me holding Lily for the first time. Henry kissing my forehead in our first apartment. The afternoon, we danced in the kitchen, laughing like teenagers, but I also saw the hard things. The night I screamed into a pillow after losing our second child. The look on James's face when I missed his graduation. The moment I stood at Henry's grave and felt completely alone. Yet, through all of it, joy and sorrow alike, one thing stayed constant. The angel was there. In every vision he stood, at a distance, quiet, watching, sometimes in light, sometimes in shadow, always present. I realized then, he'd been with me my whole life, in the background, in the waiting, in the silence. I had never seen him, but he had always seen me, and now, in this room, with my body weak and my spirit wide open, he was letting me see it too. Not to make me regret, not to scare me, but to show me. I had lived a life worth remembering. Even the broken pieces were part of something beautiful. And in that, I felt peace like I'd never known. He never spoke a single word. Not one, yet I understood him more clearly than I've ever understood anyone in my life. The angel didn't need a voice. His presence was the message. It was as though everything he wanted me to know came straight into my soul. Like light passing through glass, the message wasn't long. It was simple, direct, true. You are loved. You have always been loved. You will always be loved. That was it. No judgment. No list of mistakes. No weighing of my life on a cosmic scale. Just love. Not sentimental love. Not the kind you find in books or on greeting cards, but eternal love. Strong, unshakable, all-knowing. Love that had watched me cry at midnight. Love that had seen every sin and never left. Love that had waited patiently for this moment. And now, it was here. Not to demand anything, not to test me, but to offer comfort I hadn't even known I still needed, and I accepted it, not with words, just by letting my heart open wide, vulnerable, surrendered. I didn't try to make sense of it. I didn't try to earn it. I simply received it. And in that moment, I knew something deep and final. I didn't have to be afraid of anything anymore. Not of death, not of judgment, not of being forgotten, because love, the kind this angel brought, didn't forget, that remembered everything, and still chose grace. I never thought I'd feel this way. Not lying in a hospital bed, not at 82, not at the edge of life, but that night, after everything I'd seen, everything I'd felt, I wanted to stay. Not in the hospital, not in my broken body, but in that moment, in the presence of the angel, in the stillness that wrapped around me like the softest blanket. For the first time, the idea of dying didn't frighten me. It called to me, not as an ending, but as a homecoming. There was a lightness inside me I hadn't known in decades. Numbered pain, no pressure, just peace, deep and wide and full of welcome. I remember thinking, if this is what it feels like to cross over, maybe I'm ready. There was no tunnel, no booming voice, no dramatic decision, just a gentle longing, the kind that comes when you realize your work is done and there's nothing left to prove. I thought of Henry. I could almost feel his presence too, not beside the angel, but near, like he was waiting, just on the other side of something thin. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to tell him how the kids were, that Lily had his stubborn heart, that Elsie had his eyes. I wanted to tell him how I kept his coffee mug all these years, how I still talked to him when I watered the garden. I imagined the moment he would see me again, arms wide, that crooked grin, and I wanted that so badly, more than anything. But then, something stopped me. Not fear, Elsie. The image of her came to me, not in memory, but in presence. She was only 5, but so much of my heart lived inside her. I saw her little fingers brushing the edge of a drawing, her tiny voice asking, "Where's Nana?" Her soft hair smelling like sunlight and shampoo. And then Lily's face, worn, tired, but strong, the way mine had once been. That's when I knew I wasn't finished. As much as I longed to go, something greater asked me to stay, not forced, not demanded, just gently offered. There is still love left to give, so I let go, not of the presence, but of the longing to leave, and I whispered through quiet tears, "Okay, I'll stay." I was ready to go. Truly, my body was worn, my spirit full, and heaven, or whatever stood just beyond that hospital wall, was opening its arms. But then, in the quiet between one breath and the next, I saw her. Elsie. My granddaughter. I didn't see her the way I saw memories, grainy and faded. No. I saw her as clearly as if she were standing right there beside my bed, little fingers pressed to her chin, pink sneakers turned in shyly. She wasn't crying, she wasn't even speaking, she was waiting, and in that moment, I remembered everything. Her laugh when she first learned to say banana, the way she clung to my skirt when she was scared of the vacuum, the way she looked at me when I told her stories about angels and fireflies, and how the stars sing when we're not listening. She believed me, she always believed me, and I realized if I left now, what would happen to her faith? Who would tell her the stars still sing? Who would tell her that God listens, even when we whisper? Who would tell her that love is bigger than mistakes and that angels still walk among us, even if we can't see them? I know her mother would try. Lily is strong. So strong, but she carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. She's practical, focused. She believes in what she can see, but I believe in what can't be measured. And Elsie needs that. She needs me, not forever. I know that, but for a little longer, long enough to plant a few more seeds in her heart, seeds of wonder, of faith, of something bigger than bedtime and math homework. The angel didn't speak. He didn't need to. I already had my answer. Leaving would have been easier, but love, real love, asks us to stay when it would be simpler to go. So I chose to stay. For her, not because I feared death, but because I loved life, her life, too much to walk away just yet. And when I opened my eyes again, the hospital room was still and dim. No light in the corner, no hand on my shoulder. But I felt them both, and I whispered, "Tell her, I'm staying." Asterisk. The sun rose slowly that morning, painting the hospital walls in the softest gold dot. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't sudden, just a quiet unfolding of light, and with it, the angel began to fade, not vanish, fade, as if his task was complete. He didn't turn, didn't wave, he simply grew lighter and lighter until all that remained was a warmth in the corner where he had stood, and then, even that was gone. I stared at the space, heart full and still. I didn't feel abandoned, I felt honored. He had come when I needed him most, not to carry me away, but to remind me why I still mattered here, to help me choose to stay. The nurses bustled in not long after. "Good morning, Miss Eleanor," Clara said, adjusting my chart. "You're looking bright today." "I feel it," I whispered, smiling faintly. She paused. Did something happen? I thought about how to answer. I wanted to tell her everything, about the light, the hand, the message, about how I nearly left this world, and how love and Elsie brought me back. But I just said, I had a visitor. Clara raised an eyebrow. "A good one, I hope." "The best," I said. She nodded, and though she didn't understand, I think part of her felt it. As the morning wore on, the machines hummed steadily, my breath came easier. The tightness in my chest had loosened, even the pain had lessened, like a burden quietly lifted. Later, the doctor came in with good news. "Your lungs are responding better than expected," he said. "I think you turned a corner." He smiled. "It's like someone upstairs is watching out for you." I chuckled. "They are," I said. That afternoon, Lily returned with Elsie. She ran into the room, arms open, cheeks rosy from the wind outside. "Nana," she, Squealed. I opened my arms and gathered her close. Her hair smelled like fresh soap and strawberry shampoo. Her heartbeat pressed against my chest, and I knew I had made the right choice, because love in all its forms is sacred, and sometimes the most miraculous thing we can do is stay. Asterisk. I never expected to get better. Not really. At my age, people don't walk out of hospital rooms after near-death nights. They drift slowly and quietly disappear. That's what I thought would happen to me. But then something strange occurred. I started waking up with more strength. My chest still ached, yes, but the pain no longer clutched me like a closing hand. I could breathe a little deeper. I could speak a little more. My hands weren't as shaky. Even my appetite began to return. And then came the doctor's words. "You're improving, Miss Collins. Your lungs are clearing. Oxygen levels are climbing. I think you've turned a corner." He smiled when he said it, but there was something else behind his eyes, curiosity, like he couldn't quite explain it. I could. but I didn't try. There are things in this life that don't fit on a chart, things too sacred to measure in blood work and CT scans. I didn't get better because of medicine alone. I got better because someone gave me the strength to stay. The nurses noticed it too. "You're glowing today," one of them said as she fluffed my pillows. "Did someone come to visit?" I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "Someone very old, very kind. Clara, my night nurse, gave me a knowing look. She didn't ask. She just placed her hand on mine and said, 'Sometimes healing starts in the soul before the body catches up.' She was right. I wasn't just recovering physically. I was restoring spiritually. The heaviness I'd carried for years, the regrets, the quiet guilt, the ache of loneliness, had all lightened. My body still trembled from time to time, but my heart felt steady. Each day brought new strength, and with each breath, I felt more like myself again. Not the Eleanor of 20 years ago, not even the one who arrived trembling at the ER doors, but the true Eleanor, the one who believed in beauty, the one who prayed with her eyes closed and her hands open, the one who knew, beyond all doubt, that she had been held by grace. I wasn't healed overnight, but I was healing. And every moment of that slow return was a miracle I didn't take for granted. I tried to tell them, not everyone, just the people closest to me, my children, Clara, the young doctor with kind eyes. I didn't expect fanfare or wide-eyed awe. I didn't even expect belief, but I needed to say it out loud. What I saw, what I felt, it was real. So I told Lily first. It was 2 days after they removed the oxygen mask. I was sitting up, sipping weak tea, when she sat beside me, her hands nervously folded in her lap. "There's something I want to tell you," I said. She leaned in. "What is it, Mom?" I took a breath. "I saw an angel," she blinked. "You mean, like in a dream?" "No," I said, voice steady. "I mean I saw him. With my eyes. I felt his hand on my shoulder. I heard his message, not with words, but in my heart." Lily looked down at her hands. "You were very sick, Mom. Low oxygen, medication, the mind plays tricks." I smiled, gently, kindly. "Maybe it does. But this wasn't a trick." She nodded, out of respect, but I could see it in her eyes. She didn't believe me. Not really. I didn't push her later. I told James over the phone. He listened quietly. "That's beautiful, Mom," he said. "I'm glad it brought you comfort." It was the same kind of response one gives a child after a vivid dream. Polite, supportive, distant. And again, I didn't argue, because I wasn't telling them to convince them. I was telling them because it mattered, because if I kept it inside, it would start to fade, and I didn't want this gift to become another forgotten moment. So I told Clara, and she paused. Then, without blinking, she said, "I believe you, not out of sympathy, but from somewhere deeper. You wouldn't be the first," she added, squeezing my hand. "You wouldn't be the last." She told me she'd heard stories from patients who had one foot in this world and the other beyond, stories of music with no source, light with no bulb, love with no body. We were quiet after that, but something in me settled. Maybe no one else would understand. Maybe most would roll their eyes or nod and change the subject. But I knew, and that was enough, because truth doesn't need applause. It only needs to be spoken. I ask myself that question often now. Why am I still here? The doctors have their answers: improved vitals, good response to treatment, stable heart rhythm. They say I surprised them, that I'm strong, that I fought. But I know the real reason. I'm still here because I chose to stay. I was offered the chance to go. I felt the doorway open. I saw the light. I stood in the presence of something eternal, something that saw me completely and loved me anyway. But I looked at that love and chose to return, because I have more to do. Not grand things, not world, but important just the same. Elsie still needs bedtime stories and Sunday pancakes. Lily still needs her mother's voice on hard days, reminding her she's doing better than she thinks. My friends at church still need someone to sing the alto parts when no one else shows up for choir rehearsal. And this world, messy and tired and loud as it is, still has places that only I know how to fill. A garden bed waiting for spring, a letter I've been meaning to write, a neighbor who always smiles when I wave. I'm not here to chase time. I'm here to use it wisely, gently, gratefully, because once you've stood at the edge of forever, you see this life differently. You notice how the breeze lifts the curtains in the morning. You pay attention to the way a child's laugh echoes down a hallway. You feel the weight of a hug like it's the richest gift on earth. I don't know how much time I have left. A year, a season, a single, miraculous day. But I do know this. Every breath I take now is a borrowed treasure, and I will spend it on love, on truth, on kindness, on telling the people around me that angels are real, that peace is possible, that we are seen, even when we feel invisible. I may be 82, I may walk with a cane, I may sleep more than I used to, but I'm not finished. I'm still here. And that, my dear, is the greatest miracle of all. Asterisk.